Archaeology needs a story through history to be told, or else we are left only with evidence that speaks nothing of its own. This is true in the case where we are left only with ancient soil remains or DNA samples. Now, the evidence itself can talk only about the presence of certain things, but not why these were there in the first place and what the people were doing at that time. Time destroys many things with it, but there are stories told by people of every age that pass down from generation to generation. Whether it became a fable from God in the end or a myth, it carries many important points that can be necessary to understand the history behind the archaeological findings. I will try to discuss this point further in my next video, which I will start with the Greeks. Now, before discussing the approach of Graham Hancock in depth and other archaeologists and historians, I found it very important to first lay the groundwork on which I am going to proceed and what will be my ways of finding the evidence, whether it is against or in support of Graham Hancock. It is very essential to look at the historical ideas and descriptions that archaeologists pay less attention to. It is true that evidence speaks to us about the presence of certain things and can also tell us about what our ancestors were eating and how they were living. But the other great mystery is, again and again, the evidence that comes newly to us. A very good example is Göbekli Tepe, Neolithic Jericho, or Tel Carmel, which are telling us a different story that challenges our perception of history and forces us to rewrite it. For 1,000 years, it was believed that the legends of the buried cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum were myths. They were spoken as fabulous cities. For 1,000 years, the educated world did not credit the accounts given by Herodotus of the wonders of the ancient civilizations of the Nile and of Chaldea. He was called the father of liars. Even Plutarch mocked him. Now, in the language of Friedrich Schlegel, the deeper and more comprehensive the researchers of the moderns have been, the more the regard and esteem for Herodotus has increased. Buckle says his minute information about Egypt and Asia Minor is admitted by all geographers. As Ignatius Donnelly, who was also among the first people to promote the lost civilization, as encoded by Hancock in some points, writes, there was a time when the expedition sent out by Pharaoh Necho to circumnavigate Africa was doubted because the explorers stated that after they had progressed a certain distance, the sun was north of them. This circumstance, which then aroused suspicion, now proves to us that the Egyptian navigators had really passed the equator and anticipated by 2,100 years Vasco da Gama in his discovery of the Cape of Good Hope. It is very evident in cultures to present themselves as the most advanced and the pinnacle of civilization, just as the Romans once believed that the Greeks were nothing compared to them, while at the same time adopting Greek customs, even their gods. Similarly, Muslims argue that without the Golden Age, modern civilization would not exist. Today, we regard Albert Einstein and Newton as the pinnacle of all creativity. However, it is important to realize that every new civilization builds itself upon the foundations of older civilizations. Without the Egyptians, we cannot conceive the Greek intellectualism. Without the Greeks, Romans, and even Indians to some extent, the Golden Age would not have been possible. And without the Golden Age, there would have been no Renaissance. The creation of myths surrounding individuals, as discussed by Carl Sagan in his works, particularly regarding historical figures being attributed with extraordinary powers that captivate the modern mind, is not a new phenomenon. However, this is not part of our current discussion. Returning to the main point, it is crucial to understand why we perceive certain things the way we do. The fact that archaeology has been proven wrong many times does not mean we should blindly accept every myth. However, if a story holds some potential truth, it is essential that we do not ignore it. It is truly impressive to read the works of historians and thinkers on the history of mankind. A prominent example is Plato. from whom I will begin the next video and then proceed to cover all the Greek historians who wrote about our origins and history. In his work Critias, which can be considered a continuation of the earlier dialogue Timaeus, Plato precisely points out a date, that is 9,000 years ago. He tells us that there was an advanced civilization that was destroyed by the gods in the flood. This is the exact point in the time that corresponds to the end of the last ice age, according to our history and geology. I will explore this further in my future videos, but here I want to caution why Plato provides such a specific date. If he was unsure about what he was talking about, he could have simply given any date. Was this date a coincidence that aligns with our scientific findings? For Plato, as well as for other historians and thinkers, such as Herodotus, he was initially disregarded by many, but later proven correct about many of his descriptions. One thing in common stands out. They were not writing literature that they knew was different in nature from the myths passed down to them. For these thinkers, history was something distinct from a story. It was something that had been real at one point, and it was important to represent it fairly, without error. Converting myth into history, as we see at many points, and even Plato mentions this in his dialogues, was a common practice. It's possible that some elements were passed down without any proof and the historical record, but it's very difficult to date something that is a myth, especially when it's shared among many civilizations that claim to preserve ancient ancestral history. We know that about 11,000 years ago something happened that dramatically changed our climate, but we don't know exactly how the flood described by different cultures occurred. For Plato, the story of Atlantis was not a myth, or else he would have presented it in the same way he discusses myths like the Ring of Gyges, or the myth of Er, or the creation of love as told by Aristophanes in Symposium. But Plato has something different to share in this dialogue. He wants the reader to approach it differently from his other dialogues. I will explore this more in my next video, but here, briefly, I want to address the criticism of Graham Hancock's work, particularly the accusations of white supremacist theory that many archaeologists and historians have leveled against him. It is a very narrow way of interpreting the descriptions Hancock gives about the white-skinned people in Fingerprints of Gods, as well as parts of the magicians of the gods. Those who accuse him of this often overlook his other statements about the civilized teachers who came and taught the people. The biblical narrative is also reflected in his works, as are other creation myths. The description of the white-bearded man coming and teaching is not his invention. It's a simply historical or mythological account he included while developing his theory about the ancient lost civilization. Now the question before us is, was there a lost civilization? What do historians and those who have written about history say about this? I have been very impressed by how much has been said about this topic throughout history, and Graham Hancock's work only informs us of a small portion of it. Perhaps there are reasons he didn't include more, but I will try to go through all the records one by one from different cultures. But first, I will try to start with Plato, the man who gave us dates for the lost civilization, and a story about a flood that echoes both in Abrahamic tradition and the Epic of Gilgamesh.